Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I am sure, as am I, we're anxious to get back to our reading of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. R.W. Thompson's giving us an example, much like the United States today. That example during this period of time was Germany. Germany was under Protestant influence. Germany was the majority of Germany was Protestant, and they lived in peace and harmony with Catholics. And it is inferred indirectly, given everything that R.W. Thompson is saying about the conditions in Germany, that if left alone, without being harassed by the Jesuits, Germany would have become entirely Protestant. By the force of reason alone, Protestantism would have prevailed in Germany. And this was a threat to the papacy. It was a threat also to the monarchs of Europe to have an entirely Protestant nation, Germany, setting the example for the rest of Europe. And so that Protestantism was so overwhelmingly accepted in Germany, and peace ruled throughout the land, and even the ruling classes were happy with the state of affairs at that time. The papacy knew that it would have no way of reinstituting the old faith of Roman Catholicism. The papacy had to restore itself into a controlling power in Germany, and the only way to do it was to recruit the efforts of the Jesuits. Now, describing the condition of spiritual life in Germany at this time, R.W. Thompson gives us a quote from a Venetian ambassador who visited Germany and described the peace of Germany. He says, "One party has accustomed itself to put up with the other so well that in any place where there happens to be a mixed population," we're talking about Protestants and Catholics, "little or no notice is taken as to whether a person is Catholic or Protestant. Not only villages, but even families are in this manner mixed up together, and there even exist houses where the children belong to one persuasion while the parents belong to another, and where brothers adhere to opposite creeds. Catholics and Protestants, indeed, intermarry with each other, and no one takes any notice of the circumstances or offers any opposition thereto," unquote. So Germany is at peace, and what do we see in the Jesuit oath? That they are to incite war among peoples who were previously at peace, so that the greater glory of God might rule in the end. That is, the papacy might rule in the end. Now it says, the German author, to whom we are indebted for the above extraction, says, quote, in addition, quote, "Even many princes of the Catholic Church in Germany went even a step further and appointed men who were thorough Protestants to situations at their courts as counselors, judges, magistrates, and whatever other office it might be, without any opposition or objection being offered thereto," unquote. And these, he adds in a note, quote, "were not at all exceptional cases," unquote. So, re-emphasizing the peace and concord that existed between Protestants and Catholics in Germany at this time. Now, you might imagine that the Pope views Catholic churches or Catholic authorities in Germany appointing Protestants in powers of authority, that would be one of the first places that the Jesuits, the papacy through the Jesuits, would make alterations. And that's exactly what happens. Now, continuing where we left off yesterday, he says, notwithstanding Germany was enjoying this state of calm and repose, under the influence of that religious toleration which is the natural outgrowth of all the teachings of Christ and has the full sanction of his example, it afforded neither pleasure nor satisfaction to the ecclesiastical supporters of the papacy at Rome. They saw in it the threatened destruction of the papal system and the ruin of their ambitious hopes, unless by some means this spirit of religious toleration and liberalism could be entirely extirpated. Okay? Now remember, R.W. Thompson is giving us this example of Germany to show Americans precisely how the Jesuits are going to upset the peace of the United States of America. He's drawing a specific and intentional comparison between Germany and the United States for our benefit, so that we can know when the peace is disrupted in this country precisely how the Jesuits did likewise in Germany. This is instruction and education that is extremely important for Christians in America today. He says, they regarded Protestantism and the liberty which gave birth to it as heretical, as the worst and most flagrant violations of God's law. Okay? Protestantism is viewed by the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church and the liberty that sprang forth from the Protestant Reformation as heretical and the worst and most flagrant violations of God's law. You need to know how the Vatican and its hierarchy views Protestantism and our Protestant liberties. It's no different today in the United States of America than that view was in Germany at the time of the writing of this book. They view liberalism, they view Protestantism as heresy. And then, in this, by using the term liberalism, we're talking about Protestantism. Liberalism, in the point of view from the Vatican, is departure from Roman Catholic canon law. Liberalism is interpreting the Bible by any other authority than by the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Liberalism is opposition to the papacy and opposition to the monarchical system. Okay? All these things are embodied in Protestantism. So he uses Protestantism and liberalism as a synonym. Okay? Now, how it put an end to this liberty and destroy all its fruits was the practical question which agitated the mind of the Pope. He was willing enough to imitate the example of Innocent III and his treatment of the Albigenses by beginning the work of persecution in Germany and turning over the Protestants to the Inquisition, for that would have conformed to the canon law. Okay? If the papacy had been given its druthers, it would have done as Pope Innocent III did by just simply going into Germany with the Inquisition and mass murdering the Protestants. Okay? That would not have worked in Germany. Protestantism was too powerful. And he continues, he says, but there were difficulties in the way not easily overcome. The Inquisition was not likely to carry on its murderous work as successfully in Germany as among the Latin races trained to obedience. The Germans were not so docile and submissive. And besides, the influences of the Protestant Reformation, under the impulse given them by the courageous example of Martin Luther, had reached some of the most powerful princes in Germany, who would have stood a strong wall of protection against all such assaults. So, the success of an Inquisition would have been dubious at best. Okay? Now, they were not willing to obey the pontifical command when it required that papal emissaries should be allowed at pleasure to burn their own subjects at the stake and desolate their homes. Excommunication had nearly run its course. It had been so frequently employed to promote the personal ambitions of the popes and for trifling and temporal purposes that it was fast becoming into disrepute. Okay, the papacy's lost all of its power. It's used up all of its power. All of Europe can see the error of it, and especially Germany. It says its influence was so impaired that it had in a large degree lost its effectiveness. Protestant churches could not be closed by edicts or interdicts. Okay, the Pope had no temporal power in Germany. The rulers of Germany would not have imposed a papal interdict on the country. It says the attempt to release the German people from allegiances to their princes would have been as ineffectual as the command of King Canute when he ordered the waves of the ocean to retire. In other words, the people living in peace would never have tolerated their kings levying a papal interdict on the country, and nor would the kings ever think of doing so. And it says any form of papal malediction and anathema would have been unavailing. So the papacy, for all intents and purposes, without the help of the Jesuits, had no hope of restoring his temporal power in Germany. It says, however sick at heart the Pope may have been at this prospect so fatal to his ambition, he was not reduced to entire despair. He did not abandon the hope of bringing back the German princes to the old religion, that is, Roman Catholicism, and employing them as secular aids in such measures of coercion as should be found necessary to reduce the people into obedience. He found the old ecclesiastical weapon somewhat blunted and looked around for others. Fortune seemed at last to smile upon the Pope when, casting his eyes around, they rested upon the Jesuits, the freshly enlisted militia of the Church, who, without any sense of either pride or shame, were trained to implicit obedience without stopping to inquire whether the work required of them was good or bad, noble or ignoble. Called upon by the Pope, probably at the suggestion of Ignatius Loyola himself, the Jesuits were as ready to obey as the latter was to command, even to the extent of conspiring against the peace of Germany or any other country where barriers had been constructed to protect society against aggression. I would add the word papal aggression at this point. And it says, but the method of procedure was by no means clear. Courageous as Loyola was, he could not venture to send his small army into Germany with an open display of the instruments of persecution in his hands. They could not go as the open defenders of the papal dogmas, for they were unable to speak or understand the German language. If they had been, if they had even been able to make known their opinions and purposes, they could not have withstood the intense indignation and fiery eloquence of the disciples of the Protestant reformers Martin Luther and John Calvin. The occasion therefore demanded of Ignatius Loyola the exercise of his keen penetration, of what wonderful sagacity which never deserted him, and which at his death he succeeded in imparting to his successor. The manner of procedure he finally adopted is suggestive of serious reflection, especially to the people of the United States. So, in Germany, the woman had been taken off of the beast. Okay? Revelation chapter 17. The woman who rides the beast, the woman being the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic hierarchy, and the beast representing the governments, the papacy or the woman had no power over the beast in Germany. This is just another way of saying the Pope had no temporal power in Germany. The Jesuits were called in to reestablish the temporal power of the Pope in Germany, to make Germany Catholic, and to get control of its government. In other words, to put the whore back on the back of the beast and then go about its bloody business of persecuting God's people in Germany. Now, as unlikely as it might seem that the papacy could overthrow the Protestant Reformation in Germany, it is likewise hard to believe that the Jesuits could overthrow the Protestant Reformation in America. But again, the author tells us the manner of procedure he, that is Ignatius Loyola, finally adopted is suggestive of serious reflection, especially to the people of the United States. R.W. Thompson is using this example in Germany as an object lesson for Protestants in America today. Look what the Jesuits did in Germany to upset the harmonious peace between Protestants and Catholics at this time, and exactly what the Jesuits are doing in this country today. Now remember, this book was written in the late 1870s. This book is 150 years old nearly. And he prophesies that what took place in Germany, the methods by which the papacy overthrew the Protestant religion and the Protestant government of Germany through the Jesuit order, is the same process he'll use in this country today. Now he says, if it be true that history repeats itself and that nations moving in fixed cycles follow each other in their courses, the remembrance of the fact that many of them, once prosperous, have passed out of existence, admonishes us to inquire with exceeding caution into the relations which these same Jesuits have created between themselves and our institutions. What relations have the Jesuits created between themselves and our institutions? He says they have not changed, but are still the infatuated and vindictive followers of Ignatius Loyola, and it is well for us to know whether there are not evidences that, if permitted, they may repeat here what their society, at the command of its founder, Ignatius Loyola, attempted to do in Germany under the pretense that God had appointed them to conspire against any free and independent nation that they could not otherwise subjugate. The people of the United States spend their time in the pursuit of 1,000 objects and in the investigation of 1,000 questions, not the 1,000th part as important to them as this. Listen carefully. Let me read the warning of R.W. Thompson once again. He says, the people of the United States spend their time in the pursuit of 1,000 objects and in the investigation of 1,000 questions, not the 1,000th part as important to them as this. The role of the Jesuits in this country, the role of the Jesuits against Protestant institutions and the Protestant faith. Of all the pursuits of Americans, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, education, the rearing of children, the building of homes and families, football games, soccer, television, entertainment, you name it, all of the pursuits of the United States of America and the investigation of 1,000 questions, none of them are 1,000th part as important to them as this. And as hard as I try, I find it nearly impossible to convince people how important it is to study the history of the Jesuit order and to take a careful look at the state of affairs in the United States of America and come to the conclusion that R.W. Thompson is trying to convey here. If the United States is ever to succeed, if the United States is ever going to continue in a Christian republic, they must kick out the Jesuits. They must stop the spread of the counter-reformation in this country. They must be aware of the machinations, the political and religious intrigue of the Jesuit order. You must be aware of how they fight their clandestine war against Christ and against His people to have any hope of success of maintaining a Protestant government in this country. Again, R.W. Thompson, astutely trained, it's his professional business to examine the greatest threats to this constitutional republic, both foreign and domestic, and he came to the only conclusion there is, that there is no force upon the earth that has the power to overthrow our constitutional republic except the Vatican through the Jesuit order and the domestic Roman Catholics that live in this country. If this country ever falls, it will be at the hand of the Jesuit order. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. R.W. Thompson was absolutely correct in his assessments. Now he continues, he says, military men have long been accustomed to reserve sappers and miners as helps in the emergencies of war. These always attack under cover, approaching by slow and stealthy degrees like the tiger or the cat. They do not take the chances of actual conflict and never expose themselves to the leaden hail of battle. When the walls of a fortress cannot be battered down by direct assault, they secretly undermine them. And when the fuse is lighted, the magazine exploded, and the dead scattered in all directions, they return to their hiding places unharmed and share in the rewards of victory. That's how the Jesuits operate. It says Ignatius Loyola was a skillful and courageous soldier, perfectly familiar with all the plans and strategies of war. In the organization of his society, he had availed himself of his knowledge of both the motives of men and of the movements of armies. Hence, when he submitted to the Pope his proposed method of operation, he took the precaution to impress him with its importance and necessity, by declaring that, as its head, he should consider himself, quote, as the representative of Christ, the commander-in-chief of the heavenly hosts, unquote, and as engaged in, quote, the war service of Christ, unquote, with an army bound by solemn oath to obey him implicitly, quote, in every particular and on all occasions, unquote. Hence, also, speaking of his society, he said, quote, we must be always ready to advance against the enemy and be always prepared to harass him or to fall upon him. And on that account, we must not venture to tie ourselves to any particular place, unquote. That is, that the Jesuits must secretly skulk about all over the world without habitations or homes, and pay no allegiance to any opposing authority, to harass Protestants whensoever they are found, like freebooters upon the sea, leaving no tracks behind them. That's what they did in Germany, and that's what they're doing in the United States of America. The sappers and miners undermining our Protestant institutions. We'll be back right after this.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back to Inquisition Update. We'll continue, but first, if you appreciate Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Say a little prayer for me and send some help to Nicholas out there at First Amendment Radio. I appreciate the opportunity to be on First Amendment Radio, and I thank you, Brother Nicholas, and I pray God's blessing both for you and continued support for First Amendment Radio from Inquisition Update listeners. Now, by what means do the Jesuits hope to overthrow this Protestant government? You might think initially that it'd be an impossible task. Well, I'm sure that's what they thought in Germany, too. It says the chief thing with the Jesuits, the most important thing with the Jesuits, says Greisinger, the historian, was to obtain the sole direction of education, so that by getting the youth into their hands, they could fashion them after their own pattern, and by holding them down to the low standard of passive and uninquiring obedience, fit them to become the subservient slaves of monarchical and papal power. Education. They have to re-educate the world. And who's known as the great educators? By whose direction are all the education systems in this country fashioned? Of course, the pattern set by the great educators, the Jesuits, fitting them to be submissive servants and citizens in a global monarchy under the papacy. You want to see where the grassroots corruption of the minds of Americans today are? They are in the public schools that are following the ratio studiorum, the pattern of education developed and promoted by the Jesuit order. Their greatest asset is their influence in education. Now, it says, nobody need be told the impressible character of the youthful mind and how the stamp made upon it becomes indelible. Ignatius Loyola understood this, and realizing the impossibility of arresting the progressive advancement of Germany under Protestant influences, or to uproot the tolerant spirit that prevailed there among both Protestants and Roman Catholics, by any of the usual methods of papal coercion, he insidiously planned the scheme of bringing Germany back to papal obedience by Jesuitical training in the German schools. The process was slow, it is true, but the stake was great. And no man could have known better than he how surely it would be won if the minds of the young could be cramped and dwarfed by Jesuit teaching. In the Jesuit seminaries and schools, here, he just gave you another secret. The seminaries are as important to be influenced by the Jesuits as the schools. In other words, they have to infect the churches. And the only way to infect the Protestant churches with Jesuitical teaching is to get control of the seminaries. It was equally important to get control of the seminaries as it was to get control of the public schools. You can just bet that the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches and the movement in the 1960s and earlier even to form centralized governing powers over the Protestant churches, the general conferences of the various denominations of the Protestant churches, was to simply take the decision-making process out of the local churches and put it in a centrally located power structure that the Jesuits could influence. And so with the National Council of Churches and the World Council of Churches, church government that does not consider the wants of the local parishioners, okay? Destroying individuality and emphasizing more and more monarchical authority, more and more monarchical power. You see the same transition from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism in the churches as you see in the government becoming not of, by, and for the people anymore, but becoming hierarchical and dictatorial and monarchical. Monarchical, that's the order under which the Jesuits are most successful. So they focus their efforts in the seminaries and in the school. Education, both secular education and religious education. In the Jesuit seminaries and schools, at the period here referred to, the Latin language being the language of the church, grammar and rhetoric were taught preparatory to a college course, which last was confined to philosophy and theology. Philosophy, that's politics, and theology, that's church. We're talking about church and state. Okay? They're all interested in teaching their dogma about church and state. And what is that? That the church is sacrosanct and that the government, the state, must serve the church and rule the people according to the church's laws. And it says the latter was regarded as the most important because it culminated in obedience to papal authority and was centered in the idea that it was impossible to reach heaven by any other methods than those prescribed by the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, no education could be perfected in the estimation of the Jesuits that did not conform to their own standard by requiring the pupils to surrender their manhood into the keeping of their superiors, as they had done themselves, and thereby become pieces of human machinery to be moved about at the will and pleasure of those whom they were taught to regard as God's vicegerents upon earth. No matter where Jesuit colleges or schools have existed or yet exist, this has always been the primary and chief object and end of the education furnished by them. When it stops short of this, it is a failure. But when this object is accomplished, the society exultingly adds its fresh recruits to the papal militia to be marshaled against Protestantism, enlightenment, and popular government under commanders who never tolerate disobedience. So, we're talking about the seminaries and the schools. Educated in Jesuitical principles that unite church and state, promote a monarchical papal system both in this country and around the world, and once educated, where are they best able to serve the Jesuit and promote this same teaching throughout the country? In politics and in religion, in the state and in the church. And so they're graduates becoming trained by educational institutions established by the Jesuits or curriculums that are dictated by the Jesuits. These people, successfully graduated from these universities, are hustled off into the most powerful positions in our government and the most powerful positions in our churches. That's right, your church is one of the primary focuses of Jesuit education. It's as important for the Jesuits to transform, or corrupt, rather, our churches as it is for them to corrupt our government. And before long, if you're not seeing it already, and you may email me with any experience that you have, you're going to see your churches become more and more and more hierarchical. And one of the things you're going to witness is the vestments worn by your pastor. Gone are going to be the days of a Protestant pastor wearing the common clothes of the people. I mean, my pastor always wore a suit. Okay, a jacket, shirt, tie, and pants, slacks, okay? Before long, he's going to be wearing a robe, okay? And then some type of headdress similar to a bishop, okay? They're under the bishop's authority. And so, why not look like a bishop? In other words, they have to separate themselves from the people. The Roman Catholic Church separates themselves from the people and deifies the priest by making them celibate and by making them wear these ridiculous outfits. And we're going to see the Protestant churches, the ecumenical, evangeli-belly churches doing the same thing, trying to segregate the controlling class of people in the churches, the pastors of the churches, by some similar means, to deify, as it were, these people, and then to allow them to build great, big, fancy churches. Do you ever stop and think? It isn't the primary purpose for building a great, big, fancy church just to house more and more people. No, it's to glorify the man who stands behind the pulpit. That's what they're trying to do, to deify these men, and to reduce the people to just unquestioning servants. Already the churches are run by the pastors. Already the sermons are given by the pastors. Do you know, when I was a little kid, eons ago, when I was a little kid, members of the congregation took turns and got up behind the podium and led the most wonderful sermons, demonstrating how the Holy Spirit moves in His people. Yes, there was a pastor of the church that led the church, but the members of the congregation served and shared what the Spirit had taught them. Those days are long, long gone. Everything is orchestrated from the top. You're taught to come to your church, tell a few jokes at the entrance, go take your seats, and just take off your hat, your coat, and lay your brain aside with your Bible, and just believe and do and think whatever the hierarchy says. And more boards of directors of churches are going to be set aside, and the pastor is going to have more and more authority until the board is simply going to be a servant of the priest. And not only that, they're going to start teaching communal prayer, where the priest, who used to be a pastor, the priest is going to stand behind the pulpit. He's going to say his lines, and then the congregation is going to respond with their lines. There'll be no worship. It'll be liturgy. And then they're going to start teaching that the bread of communion, why, it's not just bread. It's not just a memorial. It's the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ to be sacrificed once again on this altar, which, by the way, according to God's law, is not to be elevated. It's supposed to be on the same level as the people. You see how they've already corrupted our churches? And now the churches are all united under a governing authority called a general conference, and they are submissive to the government. Not only to the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches, and other government institutions run by the Vatican, but they're servants right along with Roman Catholics in taking over the government. What you're having taking place right before your very eyes is just exactly what the Jesuits ordered, the union of church and state. It's all taking place right before our very eyes. We're becoming slaves to the Antichrist, to the woman who rides the beast. Revelation chapter 17. And God's people just simply cannot remain silent about this. R.W. Thompson, the message of R.W. Thompson is, you cannot tolerate this. You must be aware of this. You must educate yourself about this. It's 1,000 times more important than any other pursuit in normal life to study the operation of the Jesuits, especially how they operated in Germany, which was a Protestant country, just like the United States, living in peace with Roman Catholics. See how the Jesuits overturned that peace and made Roman Catholicism the state religion, and that's exactly what they're going to do in the United States of America. Mark it down. It's happening right now. If you can get a copy of this book, I highly recommend it. The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Get his other book, The Papacy and the Civil Power, which we also read here on the program. If the popes had their way, and they intend to have their way, with the help of the Jesuits, they will resort to the same bloody opportunity that Pope Innocent III leveled against the Albigensians. Anybody who won't bow down to his temporal and spiritual authority will be regarded as anything but Christian. They completely annihilated the Albigensians. They attempted to do the same against the Waldenses and the Lollards, the Hussites, the Protestants, and the Jews who would never bend a knee to the Pope. Don't think for a minute that they wouldn't do it to us here, right here in the United States of America. Germany wasn't sacrosanct. Protestant Germany wasn't sacrosanct. All the power of the people and the king together couldn't overthrow the Jesuits. They disrupted the peace in Germany even after the Protestant Reformation. He says Pope Julius III, successor of Pope Paul III, remember Pope Paul III was the one who authorized the Jesuits, signed them into existence with a papal bull, his successor, Pope Julius III, in aid of the conspiracy against Germany, granted an extension of the privileges originally conferred upon the Jesuits, and at the suggestion of Ignatius Loyola, authorized him to establish a German college in Rome. It was called the Collegium Germanicum. The United States equivalent of it is Georgetown University. It says the object of this college, was not to teach the German language to the Spanish, the French, or the Italian pupils then being educated in Rome in the Collegium Romanum, but to procure German youths to be taught there under Jesuit auspices and the patronage of the Pope, so that upon their return home they would disseminate Jesuit opinions and influences among the people, and thus arrest the progress of the Protestant Reformation and put an end to the religious toleration prevailing among the Protestants and Roman Catholic Germans. So the papacy created a university in Rome for Germans. And they sent German children to Rome to be educated in Jesuitical teaching, and so that they might return to Germany and overthrow Protestantism. That's happening right here in the United States of America. Only you don't have to go to Rome to be Romanized. You just go to Georgetown University or any of the other 28 prestigious Jesuit universities in this country. You don't have to go to Rome to be Romanized. You just do it right here in the country. You know, at least the papacy recognized the power of Protestantism in Germany and set up their college cabal in Rome. But the Jesuits are so bold to set up their universities right here in the United States of America. It says, in the execution of this purpose, steps were at once taken to procure from Germany some young men to be taught in Rome and put in training for the ecclesiastical subjugation of their countrymen. That such was the sole object will not be doubted by any intelligent investigator of the facts. Germany was well supplied with colleges and schools where the standard of education was higher than at Rome, but they were under Protestant management and control, and therefore considered heretical. A college, university, or seminary under Protestant control is regarded as heretical. In order to get a good education, according to the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit order, you must be educated by the Jesuits. It says it was the odious form of heresy embodied in Protestantism that Loyola and his followers were sworn to exterminate. And these young Germans were carried to Rome that they might be disciplined and educated for that purpose, to undermine the institutions of their own country. So it's German children going to Rome to be educated in Romanism, sent back to Germany to upset the peace between Protestants and Catholics, to persecute Protestants, to close their churches, to evict their pastors, and replace them with Roman Catholic priests, and to replace the Protestant government with a Roman Catholic king. Yes, Germans were trained to overthrow their own country. That's exactly what they're doing in the United States of America. Taking Americans, put them through Jesuit education, then put them in the government to make the country Catholic, to overthrow their own country. It's happening right before our very eyes. He says, have the Jesuits ever changed their purpose to make the extermination of Protestantism a leading and central feature of their educational system? Examine the educational system of this country, both in the seminaries and in the schools, and you will find the tenets for the overthrow of Protestantism. He asks another question. Have they abandoned any of the methods employed by Ignatius Loyola himself for that purpose? We shall see as our investigations proceed. But the institution of a Jesuit college at Rome was not the only means employed, inasmuch as more immediate and active measures were considered necessary. Therefore, whilst that was left to bear to bear its fruits at a latter period, the Jesuits sent into Germany some of their prudent and sagacious members, such as they supposed would be likely to exercise influence over the princes, so that through them the whole German population might be reached. So, while they're educating the German children to come back and help the Pope overthrow the government and the religion of Germany, Protestantism, they're sending in Jesuits to get control of the hierarchy, the government, the princes of Germany, church and state. Their attack is always church and state. It says these princes were the acknowledged representatives of monarchism, and it was believed that if they could be persuaded to accept the Jesuit emissaries as their allies, the usual methods of papal compulsion could be employed with impunity. Okay, if they could get these people back in power, then they would be most likely to impose Roman Catholic canon law on the people, persecute Protestantism, and stop the political and religious spread of Protestantism in Germany. It says, in this the Jesuits calculated sagaciously, and were enabled to establish several colleges in Germany, and ultimately to begin an open and direct war upon Protestantism. They did not invoke the aid of reason. They neither invited nor allowed calm discussion with learned Protestant theologians, but relied entirely upon the united authority of the Pope and the princes, that is, upon monarchical power. Finding the Lutherans and the Calvinists divided upon theological questions, they availed themselves of every opportunity to incite them to mutual strife, insisting, as they have ever since continued to do, that there can be but one true form of Christian faith, which every human being is obliged to accept or to offend God. So the other strategy of the Jesuits is to foment and perpetuate denominational doctrinal differences, to keep the Protestants divided, and to increase the hostility between those denominations, and then at the same time promote the unity of the Roman Catholic Church. So you see doctrinal divisions in your church? Well, now you know who's the instigator of it. Okay, we've run out of time. We'll put a mark here and come back and continue on the program tomorrow. You've been listening to Inquisition Update at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Email me, tom@cwaves.us. I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, the rapture will be canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.